Marlon Brando was the greatest actor who ever lived, and he could not stand Clint Eastwood. He called him that kid with the gun, a nobody with a pistol, and no real talent. For years, the public never knew Brando had said it, but hidden behind that insult was a secret about Brando himself, one that Hollywood worked very hard to bury. We only know about that insult because of Eddie Murphy. The story stayed buried for decades until Murphy described a strange evening early in his own career.
Like the way I met Brando, he called the agent and it was like, hey, I want to meet you. And I went to Brando's house because he wanted to meet me. I had dinner with Brando.
Brando, the legend himself, had invited the young comedian up to his home, and Murphy arrived starstruck, eager to talk about The Godfather. Instead, he got an earful. Brando waved off his own masterpiece as if it were nothing, then started in on Eastwood, dismissing him as that kid with the gun. Brando was only 6 years older than the man he was tearing down, yet he spoke about him like a child who had wandered onto the wrong studio lot. Think about what that means for a moment. The most worshipped actor in the history of American film, a man treated like a living god by everyone in Hollywood, privately looked down on Clint Eastwood as a nobody with a pistol. It was a stunning insult, and for years, almost no one knew it had ever been said. But the insult was only the surface of things. Underneath it sat a far bigger truth. The truth the industry spent decades quietly protecting, and once you understand it, the whole picture flips upside down. Because the legend who sneered at Clint Eastwood was hiding something enormous about himself. For generations of moviegoers, Marlon Brando was not just an actor, but an article of faith. Film schools taught him, young performers imitated him, and the whole industry agreed without argument that he was the greatest of them all.
He's the greatest film actor that I've ever seen. Hands down, and I knew that when I was in my teens.
To admit what he had truly become, a man who held the craft in contempt and treated his films like a chore, would have meant tearing down one of Hollywood's most cherished idols. So the town did what towns always do with their idols. It looked the other way, smoothed over the embarrassments, and kept the statue polished. The uncomfortable truth was left for others to tell much later, once the legend was safely beyond its reach. To see why all of this matters, you have to understand the two men standing on opposite ends of it. Marlon Brando had not merely reached the top of his profession, he had redefined it. When he exploded onto the screen in the early 1950s, first on the stage, and then in films like A Streetcar Named Desire and On the Waterfront, audiences had never seen anything like him.
I think it's more than an actor. He has become a legend, he has become a myth.
It's true to do it with Marlon. I mean, he's a legend. He's a true live legend.
He mumbled, he brooded, he seemed to feel every line in his bones rather than simply speak it. When he cried out for Stella or murmured that he could have been a contender, it felt less like acting and more like watching a real man come apart right in front of you. Critics called him a genius, and for once, the word actually fit. What makes The Waste so painful is just how much he changed before he gave up. Brando did not simply act well, he rewrote the rules entirely.
That's all like the post-Brando generation. All of those people, literally all of them, wanted to become actors because of Marlon Brando.
A whole generation of performers studied his every gesture and tried to copy that raw, naturalistic style, and the art of screen acting was never quite the same after him. He was the original, the source, the man every other actor secretly measured himself against. That was the gift he would later decide was worthless. Clint Eastwood arrived at that same summit by a completely different road and a much rougher one. He did not break through in prestigious stage dramas or win the worship of New York critics. He made his name in cheap Italian westerns the establishment sneered at, squinting into the sun as a drifter with no name, smoking a thin cigar and gunning men down with a stillness that said everything while his mouth said almost nothing.
Eastwood didn't smoke, but he did favor those little dark, smelly cigars. That and the squint in the Spanish sun and his extraordinary face created a kind of icon.
Then he became Dirty Harry, the cop who frightened audiences and critics alike. He sold more tickets than nearly anyone alive, and yet the serious people of Hollywood filed him away exactly the way Brando did, as a movie star rather than a real artist. He was, in their eyes, and in Brando's, just the kid with the gun. Where did that quiet toughness even come from? Eastwood had grown up during the Depression, the son of a family that moved from town to town chasing work, and he learned early that nothing in life came for free.
My dad used to preach to me all the time, nobody's going to give you anything. You're going to have to go out and earn whatever you get.
Before Hollywood ever knew his name, he had pumped gas, baled hay, dug swimming pools, and fought forest fires. The kind of plain, hard labor that teaches a man to show up on time and finish whatever he starts. When those small Italian films came calling in the 1960s, his own agents warned him that chasing work in a foreign country was career suicide. And he went anyway, packing his own poncho and betting everything on himself. That blue-collar discipline never once left him. He treated acting the way his father had treated every job before him, as something you did honestly, every single day, whether you felt like it or not.
I think all acting is on the same wavelength. There's just many ways of teaching oneself to act.
Here is where the truth Hollywood tried to bury begins to come into focus. The world believed that Marlon Brando loved acting more than anyone alive, that he was the high priest of the craft, the man who treated performance as something sacred. The reality was very nearly the opposite. By the time Eddie Murphy sat in his living room, Brando had come to hate the very thing that made him famous. He told the young star, in so many words, that acting was a load of nonsense, that there was nothing noble or difficult about it, and that frankly anybody could do it. The greatest actor alive had decided the whole profession was a con.
I say, why do you downgrade acting as a profession over the years?
What makes you think I do?
I've read it in the press.
This was not a passing mood or one bad night. It was the bitter core of who Brando had become. He had been handed one of the rarest gifts any performer has ever possessed, and somewhere along the way, he had decided it was worthless. He stopped respecting the work. He stopped respecting the people he made it with, and he stopped pretending to care whether the films he appeared in were any good at all. The idol the whole industry knelt before had quietly turned against the very thing they worshipped him for. And the proof was right there on the screen, in film after film, for anyone willing to actually look. Take Superman, the gigantic 1978 blockbuster that introduced Brando as the hero's father, Jor-El. Brando negotiated a staggering sum for the part, around $3.5 million for less than 2 weeks of work, a fortune almost beyond belief at the time.
You know, when I first came on the picture and I heard how much money Marlon Brando was paid for it, I was really upset because I don't think it seemed like much more money than anybody is worth.
And what did he give them in return? He flatly refused to learn his lines. At one point, he seriously suggested that Jor-El should not even appear as a person at all, proposing instead that the character be played as a glowing green suitcase, or perhaps a bagel, that simply spoke in Brando's voice. When the director finally talked him into showing his face, Brando still would not memorize a single word. His dialogue was written out on cue cards scattered around the set, and in the scenes where he cradles the infant Superman, some of his lines were printed right there on the baby's diaper so he could read them off the child. His young co-star, Christopher Reeve, a Juilliard-trained actor who had dreamed of working beside the master, came away from it stunned and deflated.
I don't say this to be vicious, but I don't worship at the altar of Marlon Brando because I feel that he's copped out in a certain way. He's no longer in the leadership position that he could be.
The towering genius he had idolized his whole life simply did not seem to care. Reeve later summed the whole experience up in 4 plain words: the man didn't care. For a film crew pouring their hearts into one of the biggest movies ever made, watching a living legend treat the entire thing as a joke was its own quiet kind of heartbreak. Then came Apocalypse Now, Francis Ford Coppola's grueling 1979 war epic, and somehow the story got even worse. Brando was cast as the mysterious Colonel Kurtz, the dark, beating heart of the entire film. He arrived on location grossly overweight, which would have been trouble enough on its own, but the real disaster was that he showed up having done no preparation whatsoever. He had not even bothered to read the book the film was based on.
But France has been on him saying you didn't read the book, you didn't read Heart of Darkness. He's been on Brando all day. He finds out Brando has not read the book.
Production ground to a complete halt while a desperate Coppola sat down with him and read the script out loud, trying to explain who this character even was. Hundreds of cast and crew members waited around for days, the budget bleeding money by the hour, while the greatest actor in the world got himself caught up on a movie he had already been paid a fortune to make. Coppola eventually salvaged something extraordinary by hiding Brando in shadow and letting him improvise, but the pattern was now impossible to deny. It repeated itself again and again across his later career. On the chaotic remake of The Island of Dr. Moreau, he refused to come out of his trailer, wandered off into bizarre improvised tangents, and dragged the entire production into the ground.
You had to just keep taking away problems that he had created in order to put the work off. And then finally, he got the work.
On another film, he insisted on playing his scenes in his underwear and flatly refused to take any direction. Over and over, Brando would take an enormous paycheck and then actively make the movie worse, almost as though sabotaging it was the entire point. By the end, a Marlon Brando appearance had become something close to a warning label. Producers paid millions for his name on the poster, and audiences who turned up often found a bloated, disengaged shadow of the actor they remembered, reading his lines off cards held just out of frame or fed to him through a hidden earpiece in his ear. He had even taken to having his dialogue taped to the foreheads and backs of the actors standing across from him in the scene. The man who once made audiences forget they were watching a performance at all now seemed almost determined to remind them of it on purpose.
And I have to tell you, I dealt with some very, very difficult actors in my life, but I have never, ever dealt with somebody like Marlon Brando.
It is worth remembering exactly who paid the price for all of this. Coppola sank his own money into Apocalypse Now and very nearly lost everything, mortgaging his house to keep the cameras rolling while his star sat unprepared. The crews on Brando's troubled productions worked grueling hours cleaning up after a man who would not meet them even halfway. Young actors who had grown up worshiping him learned the hard way that their hero saw the work and often saw them as beneath his attention. Genius excuses a great deal in Hollywood, and Brando spent that credit freely, knowing his name alone on the poster was worth the trouble. The people around him were simply left to absorb the damage. Brando always had an explanation ready for the cue cards.
If you don't know what the words are, but you have a general idea of what they are, then you look at the cue card, but it gives you the feeling as the viewer, hopefully, that the person is really searching for what he's going to say, that he doesn't know what he's going to say.
He claimed that refusing to memorize his lines kept his performance fresh, that reading the words for the first time on camera made them feel as if they were just occurring to him in the moment. There may even have been a grain of truth to it in his younger days. By the end, though, it had curdled into something else entirely, a convenient excuse for a man who simply could not be bothered to do the homework. A real professional finds a way to be prepared and alive at the very same time, and that is precisely the tightrope Clint Eastwood walked for 50 straight years. Brando had stopped trying to walk it at all. And this is the part of the story that should make you look at Clint Eastwood completely differently. While the anointed master was treating the gift of acting like garbage, throwing away one golden opportunity after another, the kid with the gun was doing something quietly remarkable. He was treating that exact same profession as though it were sacred. Eastwood's approach to acting was the polar opposite of Brando's loud, sprawling style, and yet it came from a place of deep respect rather than contempt. He believed in doing less, never more. Where Brando filled the screen with mumbling and raw emotion, Eastwood emptied himself out, trusting a single hard look, a long silence, the slight narrowing of his eyes to carry a scene that lesser actors would have drowned in dialogue. It took enormous discipline to act that way, to do so little and still hold an audience completely in your hand. He had studied the craft for years, and unlike Brando, he never once stopped honoring it. Behind the camera, that same discipline turned him into one of the most respected directors in the entire business.
I have worked with a number of excellent directors, but my favorite of all is Clint Eastwood.
They called him One-Take Clint because he trusted his actors so completely that he would often print the very first take and move straight on, capturing something raw and alive before it could be rehearsed to death. He refused to shout through a megaphone, keeping his sets so calm and quiet that visitors were sometimes surprised a film was being made at all.
I keep everything as quiet and subtle as I can, at the same time punctuating the points you need to punctuate.
He showed up prepared. He knew exactly what he wanted, and he brought his movies in ahead of schedule and under budget, year after year, in an industry famous for its waste and its chaos. There was a reason behind that speed, and it told you nearly everything about him. Eastwood had learned his trade on television, on the relentless grind of the Western series Rawhide, where there was never enough time or money to waste, and you simply had to get the shot and move forward. He carried that lesson with him for the rest of his life, believing that a crew works best when it feels like it is always moving ahead, never stalled, never standing around waiting on one man's mood. He had also spent years watching Sergio Leone, the director who first made him a star, demand take after take after take. And that experience taught him exactly the kind of filmmaker he never wanted to become. He would respect everyone's time, including the audience's. The people who worked for him adored him for it.
He always makes an interesting movie. Always makes an interesting movie. Always.
Morgan Freeman, Meryl Streep, Laura Linney, Angelina Jolie, some of the finest performers of their entire generation, all spoke warmly about the calm, respectful atmosphere Eastwood created. A place where actors felt trusted and safe enough to do their very best work. There were no tantrums on a Clint Eastwood set, no humiliations, no genius holding the whole production hostage to his moods. There was only a craftsman who loved the work, surrounded by people he treated as equals. It was everything a Marlon Brando set was not. Picture the two sets side by side for a moment. On one, a frustrated director reads a script aloud to a disinterested star while hundreds of people stand idle and the money quietly drains away. On the other, a calm, older man speaks in a near whisper, prints the first honest take, thanks his crew by name, and sends everyone home early and under budget.
When you're on the set, quiet on set, action! Let's go, cut! And Clint isn't like that at all. He's just like, okay, go.
One man treated the people around him as servants to his every mood, while the other treated them as partners in the work. The gap between the two of them had nothing to do with talent and everything to do with character. In a strange way, the two of them had become rival symbols of the American man on screen. Brando stood for raw feeling, the wounded rebel who let every emotion bleed straight to the surface, while Eastwood stood for control, the silent figure who held everything in and revealed only what he chose to. Audiences worshipped both images, and for a long while, the culture seemed to prefer Brando's open ache to Eastwood's stony calm. But there was a quiet strength in Eastwood's restraint that the passing years would prove was built to last. One style burned hot and then burned out, while the other smoldered steadily for the better part of a century. So why, really, could Marlon Brando not stand Clint Eastwood? The easy answer is plain snobbery, the great artist looking down his nose at the popcorn star. But there may have been something far deeper and more uncomfortable underneath it. Eastwood was living proof of everything Brando had thrown away. Here was a man who had also been handed real talent and enormous fame, who had also climbed to the very top, and who had chosen to treat all of it with gratitude and discipline instead of contempt. Every single time Eastwood showed up on time, learned his lines, and quietly turned out another fine film, he was unknowingly holding up a mirror, and the reflection was not kind to Brando. It is a strange and very human thing. The man who had decided the work was beneath him could not bear the sight of a man who still believed in it. Brando had convinced himself that acting was a fraud, and that anybody at all could do it, and yet there was Clint Eastwood, the so-called kid with the gun, proving night after night that doing it well, and doing it with genuine respect, was rare and difficult, and worth a whole lifetime of effort. Eastwood never had to say a single word against Brando. His entire career was the argument. There is a particular kind of guilt that hides inside that sort of contempt. Deep down, a man who wastes a great gift knows exactly what he is doing, even when he refuses to say it out loud. Brando was far too intelligent not to understand precisely what he had been given and what he was throwing away. Watching Eastwood honor the same craft so faithfully would have been a constant, needling reminder of the choice Brando had made. And few things in this world sting more than seeing someone else do gracefully the very thing you abandoned. It was far easier to call the man a kid with a gun than to sit quietly with what that kid actually represented. And that brings us to the truth Hollywood worked so hard to keep hidden. The machine that built Marlon Brando into a god had every reason in the world to protect the myth. He was their crown jewel, the living proof that movie acting could be high art. And so the industry politely looked away from the cue cards, the wasted millions, the ruined productions, and the open contempt. They kept right on selling the legend of the tortured genius long after the genius himself had stopped caring. It was a beautiful story, and beautiful stories are very good for business. Meanwhile, that same industry spent years refusing to take Clint Eastwood seriously, dismissing him as a lightweight precisely because he made it all look easy and never once made a fuss. The irony is almost too perfect to believe. The man they treated as a mere entertainer turned out to hold the deepest respect for the art, and the man they crowned as the ultimate artist turned out to hold that same art in open contempt. Hollywood had the whole thing backwards, and on some level, it knew it, which is exactly why the truth stayed buried for so very long. In the end, the two careers told the story all by themselves. Marlon Brando spent his final decades as a kind of cautionary tale, taking roles purely for the money, ballooning in weight, retreating into a reclusive and often tragic private life. His astonishing gift mostly left to rot away.
Hollywood has lost one of its greatest actors. Movie star Marlon Brando has died in a Los Angeles hospital. He was 80 years old.
When he died in 2004, the obituaries rightly celebrated the brilliance of his early years, and they were not wrong to. But there was always that long, sad second act hanging over it. The decades when the greatest actor alive could barely be bothered to act at all. Clint Eastwood went the other way entirely. The kid with the gun simply kept on working, kept directing, kept showing up before sunrise with a plan and a quiet confidence, decade after decade after decade. He won 4 Academy Awards behind the camera, built one of the most acclaimed bodies of work in the history of American film, and was still making movies as he pushed deep into his 90s, only now beginning to step back from the director's chair he had occupied for more than half a century. The man Brando could not stand did not just survive. He became one of the most respected figures the industry has ever produced.
It's tempting to say that over the years he has created an institution, except that these days there are very few institutions as widely respected or as affectionately regarded as the one we know as Clint Eastwood.
The recognition that had eluded him for so long finally arrived, and it arrived on his own quiet terms. With Unforgiven in 1992 and $1 Million Baby in 2004, the very establishment that once shrugged him off was forced to call him a master, handing him their highest honors and admitting, at long last, that the kid with the gun had been a serious artist all along.
And the Oscar for the Best Picture of 1992 goes to Clint Eastwood.
And the Oscar goes to Clint Eastwood for $1 Million Baby.
He had not changed who he was in order to earn it. He had simply outworked every last doubt until the doubt itself finally gave up. And he kept right on going long after most men his age had stopped. He directed acclaimed films in his 80s and even into his 90s, as calm and prepared as he had ever been, while the doubters who once waved him off slowly faded from the scene. Longevity like that is never luck. It is the hard-earned reward for half a century of treating the work with respect, of never burning a bridge, never wasting a crew's time, never once deciding the job was beneath him. The same humility that the establishment had long mistaken for a lack of seriousness turned out to be the very thing that kept him standing. So in the truest sense of the word, Clint Eastwood really did expose the truth about Marlon Brando, even though he never gave a single interview to do it. He exposed it the only way that ever truly lasts, not with words, but with a life. Every disciplined day on set, every film delivered on time, every actor who walked away grateful instead of wounded, all of it quietly revealed exactly what the myth had been hiding. The anointed legend had treated a priceless gift like trash, and the kid he sneered at had treated an ordinary job like a sacred calling. There is something in all of this that anyone who has ever worked hard while being overlooked will understand at once. The world loves to crown its geniuses and forgive them absolutely anything, while the steady, dependable people who simply do the job well are taken for granted and quietly pushed aside. Clint Eastwood lived on the wrong side of that bargain for years, watching lesser men collect the praise. And yet, the bargain has a way of correcting itself, given enough time. The flash fades, the contempt curdles, and the quiet professional who kept his head down and honored the work is still standing, long after the fireworks have gone dark. Maybe that is the real lesson buried inside this old Hollywood story. Talent, even genius of the rarest kind, is never enough on its own. What you choose to do with the gift matters far more than the sheer size of it. Marlon Brando was given more raw ability than almost anyone who ever stood in front of a camera, and he spent half his life proving how little that ability means the moment you stop respecting it. Clint Eastwood was handed less, was doubted far more, and was sneered at by the master himself, and he answered every bit of it with patience, humility, and work. In the end, the kid with the gun outlasted the god, and he did it without ever firing a shot in anger. If this story moved you, be sure to give the video a like. Tell me down in the comments what you think of these two Hollywood legends, and subscribe to the channel for more untold stories from the golden age of Hollywood. I'll see you in the next one.